The reigning Norris Trophy winning 100-point defenseman Erik Karlsson is on the move from San Jose, and he goes to the Pittsburgh Penguins. In a massive 3-team deal that involved the Montreal Canadiens, I gotta say, as a Sharks fan, huge win by Mike Grier. Let's start by taking a look at all of the pieces involved. So, Erik Karlsson goes from San Jose to Pittsburgh. They only retained 13% of his entire contract, which is $1.5 million for the next 4 seasons. Which is still, like, just stunning to me. Also going to the Pittsburgh Penguins is Dylan Hamiluk and a 2026 third-round pick from the Sharks. They also receive Rem Pitlick from the Montreal Canadiens. Now, the San Jose Sharks, they get Mike Hoffman from Montreal, who is signed for this season at a $4.5 million cap hit. They get Michael Granlund for the next 2 seasons at $5 million per. And lastly, they also get Jan Ruda and his $2.75 million AAV over the next 2 seasons. And then lastly, they also receive a 2024 first-round pick from Pittsburgh that is top 10 protected. If Pittsburgh elects to hold on to the pick this year, it will shift to a 2025 first-round pick. Montreal will get Jeff Petrie from the Pittsburgh Penguins, where the Penguins are eating 25% of Jeff Petrie's contract, which has him sit at about $4.7 million for the next 2 seasons. They get Casey DeSmith, who has 1 year remaining, at $1.8 million, prospect Nathan Leger, and a 2025 second-round pick from the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's start with the biggest player still in the deal. Erik Karlsson is now a $10 million cap hit instead of an $11.5 million one for the next 4 seasons. He is still, obviously, one of the best offensive defensemen in the entire league. He legitimately is one of 6 players to have a 100-point season from the back end in the last, 3 decades. Now, the Penguins, they actually saved $3.1 million in total cap space by moving out everyone like Casey DeSmith, Jeff Petrie, and Michael Granlund. However, they are now right up against the cap, and they still got to deal with the fact that Gensel is on LTIR. You can never fault a general manager in any sport for going for it. And obviously, Kyle Dubas knows that he's got a very small window to make any sort of noise and get close to a Stanley Cup. Because if he fails here, the shine from being the general manager golden boy of the Toronto Maple Leafs is going to wear off pretty quickly if this doesn't work out. Now, as a Sharks fan, I just watched Erik Karlsson for 3 seasons try and compete with another dominant offensive right-handed defenseman. And last time I checked, the Penguins still have Chris Letang. Now, obviously, Chris Letang has dealt with a ton of injuries, so has Erik Karlsson. But that being said, Erik Karlsson clearly thrives when it's his show. And obviously, his defensive liabilities have been talked about ad nauseum because there's people out there that still think that he shouldn't have even won the Norris this year because he was brutal defensively. However, the team around him is far and away better in Pittsburgh with Sidney Crosby and Malkin and a much more defensive-oriented team because the Sharks just had a black hole on defense and in net. So, knowing that Dubas and the Pittsburgh Penguins have to win now, this was a huge move that needed to be made because they really didn't have any other options. Their future really doesn't matter because their future is Sidney Crosby, Malkin, and Letang as a core, and now Erik Karlsson. In 4 years, they're going to have to go through an entire franchise realignment anyways. Let's talk the San Jose Sharks. Again, I've said this pretty much since the end of the season when Erik Karlsson trade rumors started to pick up. I would have been happy with under 30% retained and a 7th round pick. And let me explain why. The ability to move a contract of anywhere close to $10 million in this era of the NHL when every single team is just jacked right up against the cap limit is extremely difficult. I really still did not believe that Erik Karlsson was going to get traded because of that fact. But how Mike Grier was able to only retain $1.5 million, get a first round pick, and 2 serviceable wingers on a team that desperately needs any sort of just competent hockey play is nuts to me. This is nothing short of an A-plus move by Mike Grier and the Sharks. And again, a lot of people will be like, if they retained 50%, they might have gotten more from Pittsburgh or Montreal. Absolutely, in a perfect world. But we're not playing franchise mode. You got to understand that there's owners involved. And Juuso Platner was clearly not willing to eat $6 million for an entire 4 seasons just to have someone not play for him in the hopes that they get, what, a couple more first-round picks? The Penguins really didn't have that much in their prospect pool. Braden Yager would have been cool. Even Owen Pickering. But if the cost was to hold on to another $5 million per year, completely okay with it from a Sharks fan's perspective. Also, they needed to get bad. and I mean even worse than what they were this last season. You have to understand, if Erik Karlsson wasn't on the Sharks last year, they won the least amount of games, and that was with a 100-point defenseman. There is no way that they don't fall to second place in the draft, and we're talking about Adam Fantilli. I'm completely stoked with Will Smith, but that's because the Sharks drafted at 4 and not 2. The next few seasons, they will be in firm contention to actually draft inside the top 2. And when you look at the numbers of what the Sharks actually did last year, they lost a ton of overtime games. I'm talking like 16. So if even 5 of those are dubs, they might not even be in the bottom 5. And analytically, they weren't nearly as bad as the bottom 3 team in which they needed to be. So again, as a Sharks fan, I am stunned that they were able to do this. Now, Mike Hoffman, he makes his return to San Jose. People might forget that he was actually a Shark for a hot minute in one of the more hilarious Doug Wilson moves, in which Ottawa did not want to have Mike Hoffman play in the Atlantic, to only take Hoffman and then flip him for a pick to Florida. But nonetheless, he makes his return. I don't see any way that Mike Hoffman is a Shark by the end of the season. He is almost certainly going to go to the New York Rangers or something at the trade deadline, probably along with Anthony Duclair. So this trade is not finished yet, because Mike Hoffman, along with Michael Granlund, who is a shell of his former self, he is still going to get top 6 minutes in a prominent spot on the power play to hopefully be able to shop him. If it's not at this year's deadline, because he has 2 years left on his deal at $5 million per, there is no way he will finish as a San Jose Shark. That is more assets for Mike Grier. Jan Rutta, not very good, but they just need bodies on the back end. Moving Erik Karlsson, they need a defenseman, so again, that's really a nothing play. Again, as a Sharks fan, I do not want middling. I think that every fan of a team can agree that the worst spot for your team to be is not in the playoffs and not in a bottom 5 spot for a pick. So they needed to just scorch earth this thing, move on from the Doug Wilson era, and now I have got far more faith in Mike Grier as a general manager, because with the way that he was able to draft last year and this year, on top of the trades that he has made, he looks like he might actually be an extremely good general manager. Finally, let's talk about the Montreal Canadiens, as they get Jeff Petrie back, as well as Casey DeSmith, Nathan Lejar, and Pittsburgh's 2025 second-round pick. So their involvement in this is essentially to eat Jeff Petrie and Casey DeSmith's contract. Now, this is coming from Eric Engels. It does look like the Canadiens will trade Jeff Petrie. Not necessarily immediately, but likely before the season starts. Pittsburgh has already paid Petrie's $3 million signing bonus for the season, and Montreal can retain 50%, trading him out, making him 2.35 against the cap next season, as well as this one. So, again, just more assets to be involved in the deal to help facilitate this trade. This is a huge win for the Canadiens as well. After looking at everything that has happened and all of the pieces involved in this deal, again, we're just armchair general managers. We really don't know anything. But from a fan's perspective that has watched the San Jose Sharks from start to finish, for the last 20 seasons, I've seen some of the biggest trades in the history of the NHL facilitated by Doug Wilson. And while this one does not seem all that fantastic for San Jose, because they lose easily the best player in the deal and a Norris defenseman, and all they got back was essentially a first-round pick, this allows them to be as bad as they need to be and have the flexibility sooner to go out and sign whoever they want in free agency over the next coming seasons to be competitive quicker. I would love to know your guys' thoughts and takes on this trade. This is one of the most fun deals that has happened in quite some time. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below, and I'll see you next time. Let's go Sharks.